that shortly. And I'm going to share my screen now, and I'll just check with Joanne. You can see my screen? Good, thank you. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to the Safe System Crash Investigation course. And this is brought to you by Safe System Solutions and Strandroth Incorporated. And I'll introduce Joanne and Tanner shortly. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the varied lands on which we're running this social distance education training. And as I mentioned, we've got participants from across Australia and New Zealand, from different organisations. And we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging from the varied lands. This is, I mentioned there that we are recording the session. Why do we record the session? Well, we record the session for a couple of reasons. One is that you can go and review what was said. So you might want to re-watch an explanation of a crash or a case study or some of the technical information. And so you'll be able to do that. We'll provide you with a link to the recording. Also, if you need to get back to something urgently, you will be able to watch the recording. So we do have that there. I also provide a content warning. We do show crash scenes. This is a crash investigation course. You will see crashed vehicles. You will see some details around that can be quite confronting and quite disturbing. We do that with the aim to prevent these incidents in the future or lessen their severity, and to learn from them and to be able to identify a number of different things. We will warn you if we get to anything that could be sort of quite confronting just before we're sort of there, but I do flag that for you at this stage. So I know many of you, and it's lovely to sort of virtually see you or see your name there. My name's Ken Beer. I am the Principal Engineer at Safe System Solutions, and there's my contact details. And so if there's anything in the course associated with the admin logistics management of the course, you can get in contact with me, and you can shoot me an email, give me a call. Also, I've put up there a little QR code to my LinkedIn. If anybody would like to link with me there, it's a nice way to keep sharing information about road safety. So I'm the program moderator. I'll do a little bit of content right at the end of the session about application of some of the learnings and how we go about crash investigation and how we can change things and improve things. I'll do that in the last session. I'll introduce the people who are going to present you the bulk of the content shortly. Now, some of you, or quite a few of you, have done courses with us before, and of course, everybody in the world is now a Zoom expert, so I don't need to give you too much detail on that. But you'll notice you're in the Zoom webinar version, which is slightly different to the normal Zoom call. The mode that we like to use, or the method we like to use for you to communicate, is the chat. So we have disabled your ability to unmute yourself and talk to us or turn your camera on. And the reason for that is we don't want the dogs barking in the background and people forgetting to unmute and talking to colleagues and the like. We like you to put stuff into the chat. You'll notice that on your chat, you have the ability to talk directly to the facilitator or moderator, or you can use that little drop down and put your comments so everybody can see it. And we really like that, so others know what questions are being asked, or if you have comments on different things, that you can put that information in there. So please use the chat, and I stress that it's best not to wait for us to pause and say, are there any questions? As you think of a question, type it in. If that's covered in the next little bit, then that question won't be fed through to the presenter. But if you wait for us to ask the questions and then start typing, we will probably have moved on by the time that question pops up. So pop your questions in or your thoughts or comments around any of the slides. We do have the ability to unmute you or give you the ability to unmute yourself. So if you really want to discuss something, or we do a case study and we're asking for volunteers, you can raise your hand. We will then give you the ability to unmute yourself. There is no ability for your camera to come on during a webinar version, but there is the ability with our settings to make it so you can talk and have some dialogue. So that may be used. If for some reason the chat is not functioning for you, maybe your firewall has disabled it, you can use the Q&A function there, and we will monitor that as well. The chat is our preferred, though. Technical issues, they may arise, and the usual way to get around it is shut down Zoom and restart it, and you will usually fix the issues. If that doesn't work, you have some options there. You can dial in. There are some phone numbers and listen. However, you may just elect at that point to just watch the recording, which will be provided. But we do like you interacting. Now, you should have access to our learning management system, and you will need access to the learning management system in order to successfully complete this course. So if you haven't got that, you need to get in contact with myself or Kathy or whoever's sent out emails to you that's got you this far in terms of being able to log in. You'll need this to complete quizzes and assignments, and yeah, it's a place where we're going to house different information as needed. It's also the point where we upload the videos or the recordings of the sessions. So I will take you at the end through that to show you what we're doing for the quizzes. Again, a lot of you are quite familiar with the learning management system. Okay, I'd like to introduce our two main presenters, our technical experts associated with crash investigation, biomechanics of injury, and a variety of other road safety related topics. But first of all, we have Dr. Joen Strandroth from Strandroth Incorporated, Safe System Solutions and Lozinger. Joen, I'll get you to give us a little bit of background, noting that you're going to also give a little bit of background when you actually start your presentation. But if you want to unmute yourself there and say hi.
All right, hi everyone. I'm excited to bring this course to you together with Ken and Tana. I'm currently in Sweden at the moment, and this is where I reside. This is where I come from, even though I've been working in Australia for 3 years and a bit, living in Melbourne and Victoria, and working for Vic Roads and Department of Transport. I started my career in road safety doing crash investigations. It's what I come from. So vehicle dynamics and injury biomechanics, and in connection to that, I did my PhD in machine and vehicle systems. From there, I've used that quite a lot in strategy development and analytics, and to sort of use crash learning or learnings from crashes, be it statistics or crash investigations, to support strategy development and investment planning. So that's mostly what I'm doing at the moment. Still, maybe 50% of my time would be in Australia. 50% of my time would be where in the world, mostly in Central Asia at the moment. So yeah, sure about me.
Thanks, Joen. And yes, Joen is really a sort of world expert associated with not just the crash investigation side of it and the very detailed investigation of the vehicle, the roadside, the people involved and the like, but also translating that to larger system outcomes and understanding that. And that will be a lot of the focus today. And Joen is going to be the main leader of the course, presenting most of the technical content, and we've got also Dr. Tanner Tan, who is the Research and Evaluations Lead at Safe System Solutions, and has his PhD associated with biomechanics of injury and has a lot of experience with crash investigation and development of different models and the calculations behind these things. So maybe a short introduction from yourself, Tanner.
Yep, sure. G'day, everyone. I'm located in Melbourne, so same city as Ken, and I'm, as Ken mentioned, also the head of Research Evaluation at Safe System Solutions. So my background is in mechanical engineering, so I've always loved vehicles, especially vehicle safety, but also combined that with masters in biomedical engineering, so I love understanding the human body. About 10 years ago, I combined both of them to complete a PhD, and that was specifically looking at chest injuries, or specific fatal and serious chest injuries in vehicle rollover crashes. So as Ken mentioned, very passionate about biomechanics of injury. And later on this course, I'll be presenting a module on the biomechanics of injury and vehicle crashes and understanding them. I can see Naomi has also made a comment there saying that she enjoys it as well. So sounds like two of us got a very similar interest there. So it's great to have you aboard, Naomi.
Thanks, Tanner. And as mentioned there, Tanner will be back for our module 3, where he will delve into some specifics of analysing vehicles, what we can learn about that, and also linking that further through to system outcomes. Now, you've got there the contact details of both Tanner and Yuen, and it's we really encourage that continued dialogue with these technical experts after the session. We like that. And if you do have questions about the technical content of the course throughout, if you're struggling with understanding an assignment question or the like, you're able to get in contact with them at any point, and we can organise some one-on-one coaching, or they will be able to send you documentation. We will have a portal where we will upload different relevant literature, research, fact sheets and the like as we go and as they are mentioned in the course, but you may like to contact them to get other information. So we do have some competency benchmarks for this course, and many of you are used to this by now, having completed our Safe System Assessment course or our Road Safety Audit course. But to successfully complete the course, to gain your certificate, we ask that you attend 3 of the 4 live webinars. Now, we would love you to attend all 4 and to interact, to ask questions through the chat, make comments, to get involved in the polls and the like, but if you need to miss one, we understand. If you need to miss more than one, get in contact with me. We have a little bit of a weird scenario where the Australian government has decided to make a public holiday on our 4th module day. So we have moved that. You would have received an email that has pulled that one day back. Now, that may cause some scheduling challenges for some people. The recording will be available, but hopefully that will fit within your calendar and you're able to attend that. But yeah, get in contact if you are not able to make at least 3 of the live sessions. We need you to complete the set tasks. So we have a variety of quizzes and assignments, and we need you to get that 80% pass mark again. And you've got up to 3 attempts at any of the quizzes or assignments. Now, we have, hopefully you would have received a pack in the mail, which has got just some little goodies to help you along the way, but also some 3D goggles where you can put your phone in, because we will have a look at some crash scenes, not with the vehicles there, but the road environment of the crash scene, for you to think about how you would go about doing crash investigation of that area and look at ways we could reduce trauma. Of course, we have opportunity to win prizes, as we always do. And so at any point, Tanner or Yuen might decide to give out a prize to somebody for a good answer, or a prize for the first person to to answer or to volunteer, I'll also do the same. And we will send you your prizes after the session. So something to incentivize you. And if you log in a little bit early for the sessions, we'll give you a chance to win a prize with some trivia. Okay, so we're about to get started, but I thought before we get into some of the content in our shorter first module, this is a shorter first module, I would do a little poll just to find out a bit more about who we've got in this group. So Ewan's got a little poll coming later on, but I'm going to launch a poll, and it's also a little practice to check that our poll system is working. And it's just really finding out who we've got. So hopefully that's popped up on your screen, and we're asking, what is your role? A state or national road authority from that regional perspective. So you're in one of the regions, or are you a state or national road authority in that more central policy strategies / program, maybe called head office style person, consultant, police, insurance agency, or other? So some of you would have seen in the learning management system, you are able to introduce yourself, and so you can pop in there and give a little bit of your background and a photo if you like. But we're seeing some of the information come in now, and this will give you an idea of who the other participants are in the course. So I'll give that another 5 seconds. I think we've got most people have managed to see the poll pop up and answered there. Don't worry too much if it hasn't popped up. There's nothing in this in these live modules that can contribute to your overall mark for the course. That is simply all that is done after the actual live sessions. I'll give it 5 more seconds, see if we can get those last couple of people. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I'm ending poll. We almost got everybody there. I'm going to share those results with everybody. And you can see there that we are dominated with the state road authorities or national road authorities in New Zealand, there, Waka Kotahi, or the state road authorities, and those regional people that are out there doing those crash investigations, potentially developing black spot projects, looking at these crash areas or crashes that have occurred. We have good representation from that more policy, strategic, and program level from those state and national road authorities. And we have good representation from local government, and local government also being at the coalface there of looking at crash scenes and looking at the road environment and trying to develop solutions to prevent these in the future or lessen the severity of these in the future. So I think that's a wonderful mix that we have there. And I should say that my background and one of the very first roles I had was from that state road authority perspective in the region, doing the fatal crash investigations, which many of you will be doing the same things and looking at these areas where crashes have occurred, not as the not in that emergency immediate response while the vehicles and people are still there, but in the days following, to go out to the scene and look at how did the road contribute. So how did that road potentially contribute to the death of some of those involved in that crash scene. And I give this sort of little analogy and little story that we really had a mentality of doing that it was a legal liability thing. And we wanted to, in a sense, prove that the road was not a contributing factor. And if we determined that it was a contributing factor, that we had some measures that we could put into place to stop those hopefully occurring in the future. But we really looked at that from a standards perspective. We went out there and we looked at that individual spot and asked ourselves, are we meeting the standards in terms of signage, line marking? Is there anything that might have confused a driver or the like? So are there serious deficiencies in the pavement? As a potential skid resistance issues? We might collect some maintenance data and the like, and we build our little documentation to show whether the road had contributed or not. Now, at that time, if we were to have identified that somebody was intoxicated, somebody was speeding over the speed limit, immediately that almost got triaged into a certain category to say, well, the road is not a factor in this. It's that individual behavior and choices. Now, that was a long time ago. And we have evolved in our thinking holistically about the system. Some of these elements still lag and remain in our crash investigation and our fatal crash investigation across a variety of jurisdictions. And what UN has been doing is working with the Victorian government, the New South Wales government, and getting insights from others. And we know there's others around New Zealand and in Queensland starting to look at, is this the right approach from a road authority? Is this the way we should be looking at these situations? And what can we do better? And what can we do more holistic and systematic within this? And that's a lot of what we really want to cover in this course. We want to ensure that you have good mechanisms for going out to those crash scenes, not necessarily when the vehicles are there on scene, and in fact more past that, as most of our road authority people will do, going out to those scenes, getting a really good picture for what happened and the mechanisms of injury, and then understanding the road environment from not just that, does it meet the current standards, and can we wash ourselves of liability associated with that, but more holistically about thinking, what is our system here? What needs to change in order for us to prevent death or serious injury? Now, Johan is going to sort of really build and flesh that out as we go. And we are going to ask for your contribution, your thoughts, your experience in this, as we certainly know quite a few of you have done those fatal investigations, have come at it with a certain mentality due to the fact that that's how we've been taught to do it. And we will ask for how you think that these things can be improved as well. So that's my introduction, and I've given the sort of how this course is going to run, but please pop in any questions as we go. And the way this is going to work is that Tanner and I are going to turn our cameras off, and we're going to drop into the background. I will be monitoring the chat there, and I will periodically feed questions to Johan to ask him about specifics of his slides or any questions that you have put through, and I'll periodically do that. Or I might answer some of the things in the chat directly as well. Okay, so Johan, it looks like we don't have any immediate questions on how the course is going to run at this stage. I will, at the end, spend 5 minutes just helping people navigate through the learning management system. And we won't have a break in this shorter first module. We'll just run through in our hour and a half. In our longer modules, the next modules, we will have a break for people to have a stretch and the like. But I'll just pause there, and Tanner, I'll check if you have any last things that you want to say, anything I've forgotten to mention before we drop into the background.
All good. I think covered it all, Ken.
Okay, Thanks, Dana. And over to you, Yoann. We can see your slides very clearly, and
Good.
I'll jump in when we have some questions from the group.
All right, thanks, Ken. Thanks, everyone. Let's start the session. And as Ken said, we have an hour approximately ahead of us in going through the content. I'll probably do a very short break in the middle just to catch our breath and see if everyone's still there. And we'll have some poll, etc. And we'll count on Ken to interrupt me if I just blab along without sort of leaving any room for reflection. But I'll start with this content slide in terms of what we're planning to cover today, and I use it also as a bit of a background to my or a bit of a storyline to my background in crash investigations. But we're going to talk briefly about crash investigations as just general crash investigation, where it comes from a bit and how it's been used. Talk about crash investigations in different areas and where it comes from. Focus, of course, then on road crash investigations, but still there are a few different types of road crash investigations, and I reckon you would be familiar with most of them, even though normally what we would see on the news is the police forensic crash investigations. So we'll have a bit of a look on the different types of crash investigations that's done in the road environment, and then we're going to zoom in a bit later after that on Vision Zero, even though I reckon that most of you would be familiar with Vision Zero and the safe system approach. Still, we can't really get through this course without pointing on some of the fundamentals to then sort of see where does safe system crash investigations fall into this? What are the areas in the Vision Zero principles and the safe system approach where crash investigations can be a good tool and has been used as a good tool to understand sort of the gaps in the systems, and also telling us what do we need to fix, what can we do, what can we learn from crashes to improve the system and to make sure that we get as close to zero fatalities and serious injuries as possible. And that's really my background. I did my basic engineering education in vehicle dynamics, and while my other student colleagues went off to F1 and other type of racing stuff, which I think is really fun and follow still, I went into crash investigation. I, for some reasons, ended up in an apprenticeship with the Swedish Transport Administration, and I learned that they just adopted Vision Zero as their overall approach back in '97. The Parliament made the decision that the Vision Zero should be the road safety strategy approach that we're using. And following that, they started to do crash investigations to understand a bit more about the background to fatal crashes. So there was a government decision that we should do crash investigations on all fatal crashes. So it wasn't really a decision made by the Swedish Transport Administration, even though they, of course, was in the background preparing this. It was actually a parliamentary decision. So it's not something that we can choose to do or not to do. It's something that needs to be done. And it was in the learnings of that we wanted to understand not really why crashes happen, because it could be 10,000 different reasons. It was more to understand if zero is our target and our focus is fatalities and serious injuries, what was it in this particular crash that resulted in a fatality? While we have 1,000 other crashes in a similar manner, which end up in minor injuries or no injuries or just property damage, this particular one was a fatality. Why was that? How come? What are the crash forces in this crash that actually made that happen? Or what are the shortcomings in protective gear or whatever? So I started to do that mainly as a consultant. I worked for the Swedish Transport Administration, but also for trying to help the police as an expert witness in court cases or insurance industry when they do crash investigations. And I did that for quite a number of years before I sort of went on from that and said, well, you go out on the road and you see this crash happening again and again and again. You sort of, as Ken said, note the same things. And sometimes you don't want to do it, but you fall into sort of a blame the victim approach, where you realize that there's multiple victims on this stretch of road. Some are family cars, some are a lonely consultant, some are fatigue related, and you find all these reasons, but basically they're crossing the center line and ending up in opposing vehicles. And you realize there should be a strategic response to this. How can we learn from these crash investigations, where we actually can pull that up on a higher level to understand more systematic or systemic risks in the system, take those learnings and get it into the organizational learnings, and then learn from that and do something about it. So as we said, this is what we're going to try to do on this course, and we're going to try to systemize that and get it into a format that's manageable. So we're not going to be reconstruction experts after this course, but hopefully we'll be better at learning from those strategies that happens out there on the roads. Okay, so in terms of learning from crashes and injuries, there's a lot of ways to do that. And in modern days, we can see that we've gone from sort of doing some notes out on the roads to really advanced dash cams or other type of real life situation learnings. But basically, it goes back to crash statistics or crash investigations, where we have crash statistics looking at the whole picture, trying to learn from a representative selection of crashes, a high number of crashes, compared to crash investigations, which are more case studies. So we're going in depth into one case to draw learnings from that. So on the left-hand side, we have crash statistics that learn from crash data, typically like the figure on the left, where we can pull out numbers and figures and understand what's the number of fatalities in the European Union in 2019. We look at different road user groups. We can compare them to each other, and we can look at conflict diagrams and understand that the most common injury is a car-to-car collision or something like that. So we need a lot of data. We pull out information that's normally in registers, and we can learn by analyzing or synthesizing those crash data. While the crash investigation more looking at individual events, something catastrophic has happened and we want to learn more about that, or it may be an incident that's not a catastrophic event that's resulted in a lot of damage or injuries, but it's something unwanted, something that's potentially is a risk, and we want to learn more from that. We have quantitative knowledge in crash statistics and more qualitative knowledge from crash investigations. People are experts in either quantitative data or qualitative data. Some are experts in both. They're not the others opposites in terms of they're good or bad. It's really complementary pictures of different things. So quantitative data, we learn from a lot of statistics. Qualitative knowledge, we learn from more individual events, and of course you can have a lot of qualitative knowledge and make statistics out of that as well, which crash investigation could be a good example of. In terms of crash statistics, we normally use numbers, tables, graphs. We try to illustrate numbers and the conclusions out of that, not just in big raw data numbers, but also make it illustrative for people to understand and to draw the conclusions, and for us to tell the story that we want to tell. While when we look at crash investigations, it's more about narrative, witnesses, it's about photos and sketches, and it's about in-depth investigations of the characteristics of certain crashes or the circumstances of certain crashes. While in crash statistics, maybe it's more about proportions and shares. And of course, this is a brief presentation. We will not dig into all the learnings about statistics here. It's just a summary. But we look at trends, while in terms of crash investigations, it's more detailed characteristics of events. So in the end, we more look at the conclusion from the big picture in crash statistics, and crash investigations, we sort of want to come to conclusions about why things happen and why things didn't work as intended. And of course, as an extension of that, we want to understand how to prevent things from happening again. But that's normally towards the end of the investigation, when you have the investigation conclusions in front of you and you sort of try to understand what you can do to prevent it. But mostly the crash investigation will focus on what happened, what was the fatal injuries, what was the injury mechanisms, and then how do we prevent from happening again. So this process has been with us for quite a while. We have been learning from crashes and injuries for quite a while, and crash investigations are used in many different fields as a tool for continuous improvements. And we can see in many areas in society, be it work related safety or occupational health and safety, or nuclear power plants or other type of manufacturing industry, or aviation industry, or railway industry, or road traffic. We have gone from quite rudimentary thinking in terms of these children on the machines, where if they get stuck with their hand in that belt and they lose an arm, you get the next kid in the line to do the work. While today we're not accepting these kind of conditions, and we say that, well, if you do that or even think about compromising safety, that's not okay. We're going to shut down your factory, and the union would pretty much go in and say that you guarantee safety first, or you show us that you have a protocol for safety and safety management principles. When you do that, you are allowed to do certain things in your manufacturing plants. So safety first and a mature safety culture is common practice in many fields today, which we can see on the right-hand side. But crash investigations has been a tool to actually help us understand what to do to get there. So while crash investigations in itself is not really enough to motivate the safety improvement, because in order to do that, we need ethics, and we need to have a more mature safety culture, and we need to have people that lead something in that direction. Crash investigation is really the tool to understand what to do. It's a good evidence base when we have a good motivation to do better, and we ask ourselves, what do we need to do? Crash investigations can be a tool to do that. So either continuous improvement, small incremental steps, or sometimes, which we can see on the lower left-hand picture, it's been a common response to catastrophic events. Sometimes it's someone that really wants to make a difference because something catastrophic has happened, but more common, actually, it's more the society's needs to understand who was in the wrong, who are we to blame. And on the back envelope of that, of course, we as professionals want to understand more than that. We want to understand what actually happened, what caused this catastrophic event to happen, and we want to understand how to prevent it. So in the early days of crash investigations, we can say that most crash investigation sort of practices come from accident research that has been a while around for 50, 60, 70 years. You can sort of limit it to more modern crash investigation and accident research methodologies. But it's quite common in accident research to work with root cause analysis. And this is not something that we're going to dig into deeper, but what's quite common and what's commonly used in crash investigations is to have some kind of sequence of events. You want to understand on the left-hand side there's a certain condition in reality that starts in a certain way, and there might be several contributing factors or root causes or latent type of, we can call them risks or just events or condition states in the system, which, if they're combined in time and in certain circumstances, they lead to a crash or an incident. And that crash or an incident could either be non-dangerous, or it can have a potential crash sequence where it results in an injury. And our job sometimes is then to understand why did this happen and how can we break this chain of events from that root cause to the crash or to the injury. And if we're talking injury prevention, normally it's almost accepting that crashes will happen, but try to break the chains from that crash happening to the injury. Although sometimes it's more efficient to actually, if we can, prevent the crash from happening in the first place. So root cause analysis is really to try to always ask the question why, until it's not meaningful anymore. Why did that happen? Okay, because of this. Well, why did that happen? Oh, well, that was because of this. Okay, well, why did that happen? So we can just take one example where we can have a machine. It stopped because it was overloaded. It blew a fuse. If you don't have a root cause analysis, you'll change the fuse and you'll go back to operation, which probably will work for a while again, but then you have a blown fuse again. So you want to understand a bit more, maybe like why did that fuse blow? Well, then we have an investigation. The machine was overloaded because it has a bearing or a bearing that wasn't sufficiently lubricated, maybe. We continue our investigation. Why wasn't it lubricated enough? Well, it had an automatic lubrication mechanism, and that had a pump, and that pump was not pumping sufficiently, hence a lack of lubrication. So we now understand it's a faulty pump. So that's really the root cause. But why is that? Well, that pump has a worn shaft, as we can see when we pull it apart, and that shaft was worn because there were metal scraps in the pump, and that sort of didn't have appropriate filters, so that the pump was contaminated or the lubrication mechanism was contaminated. So really the root cause of this was that it lacks a filter, maybe. And you can then sort of conclude that, okay, was it, should there be a filter there? Was it maybe a manufacturing fault or a glitch or something that should be put there in the first place? Or maybe it was a filter there, and which we later understood there was no routine for maintenance, so we should have sort of emptied that filter every second week or something. So really, we can go down to the root cause of a maintenance issue in this case. So it just shows one simple example that when you do a root cause analysis, which we're not going to sort of dig into in detail in this course, but the essence of it is to ask why, to try to understand why all the way. Now, one thing which I've encountered many times is that while you found the root cause, maybe you may be frustrated to understand that root cause, of course, if you want to prevent that, could be on different levels. So you might have an operational level where we already have routines in place, but for some reason the maintenance didn't happen. So there is a failure on an operational level. Or really on a manager level, there's no routines to serve the operator on how to maintain things. So there should be something on the manager level that is sort of rather the root cause to why this was not in place. Or it could be a neglect on the executive level where there's not enough funding, or there's not enough time in the schedule, or there's not enough resources to actually do this. So while we have the root causes on an operational level and we try to understand why things happen, normally you want to escalate it and say, where in the organization do we actually have the mandate to prevent this from happening? Where do we need to guide decision makers on what they need to do to actually prevent this from happening again? And this is very relevant in the road crash investigation, where we not only try to understand why have things happened or why have things resulted in a fatal crash, but on what level in our organization can we actually prevent it again? So that was just a bit of a background to what we've seen on crash investigations, sort of in history, how it's been used, and also some of the basic principles. And we know that time is running quick today, and we're not going to be able to find anything in that learnings, but we want to continue a bit then to look at specifically road crash investigations and see what's done on the road today and what are the different investigations that are done for different purposes. And I think most would be familiar, at least in Australia, with forensic police crash investigations. We'll look a bit into that. We have crash investigations on the road environment that is for research purposes to sort of investigate different types of research questions. We have road authorities, which we understand now that most of you are representing. We have vehicle industry that would normally do research or crash investigations to do continuous improvements on their products. And we have insurance companies that sometimes do crash investigations to understand their liability or to understand what happens to investigate if they are to compensate a client with a claim. There might be more things out there, but these are the ones that are most prevalent, and we want to have a bit of a look in each one of them, and then we're gonna sort of have a bit of a break, and then we're going to conclude or look a bit more on road crash investigations in terms of road authorities, and then safe system crash investigations and how that's a bit different or what we can do from that. So if we start by the forensic crash investigations, it's what most of you would be seeing in the news, where there's a fatal crash and you ask the police what happens and they say, we're going to do investigation. But it starts still with defining a crash or defining a road crash. And the Red Cross has a rather extensive road policing program through the Global Road Safety Partnership, which has some good guidance on crash investigations and reporting guides. And they have pulled out a definition of a road crash, which is something like this, which is quoted there in the slide. So a crash, also called a traffic collision, a motor vehicle collision, a car accident, or a car crash, occurs when a vehicle collides with another vehicle, excuse me, or a pedestrian, animal, road debris, other stationary obstructions, such as a tree or a pole or a building. And road crashes often result in an injury, disability, death, property damage, as well as financial cost to both society and the individual involved. In general, accident research, where I come from, or accident, you define an accident simply as an unexpected and unwanted event that result in property damage and or personal injury, which could then be separate from an incident where you don't have an injury or a property damage. So really, it's an unexpected and unwanted event that causes injury or damage. But this definition here is a bit more sophisticated, I would say. Now, on the back of that, for the purpose of crash investigation, that they go on continuing and stating that a crash investigation then could be defined as follows, where a crash investigation is a search for the truth in the interest of the public health and safety, of justice, and in accordance with the specifications of the law. So we can see that from a forensic crash investigation perspective, we have the law in front of us, and we have justice according to the specifications of the law in front of us, because eventually what we need to do in a forensic crash investigation is to present evidence to a court to be able to prosecute a driver or a rider in the event that they've done something which is not in accordance to the law, which has resulted in an injury. So it's a quite specific purpose, and we're just gonna pull out some of the responsibilities for the Major Collision Investigation Unit, which acts in Victoria and the Victorian Police. So what they do is to, when they go out on a scene, which they do sort of in difference to many road organizations or road authorities, they would go out on the actual scene. So they would go out when the vehicles are still in place and when sometimes people are still there, and they obtaining statements from witnesses, persons involved in the collisions. They would be interviewing and charging offending drivers, which is of course key there. They would be compiling the brief of evidence, normally attending court, providing that evidence. Of course, practical things as 3D laser scannings, photographings of scenes, crime scenes, and the collision scene interpretation. So it really goes back, and I want to sort of come back to that what you do on the crash scene is, of course, a representation of the purpose that you have with your crash investigation. And that's why when we say crash investigation, it could vary quite a lot on what you're doing, depending on your end goal with that investigation. So if you have a forensic crash investigation, I mean, you can hear it by the name that it needs to be forensic, because at the end of the day, you're presenting evidence in a court, and those evidence are going to be challenged, and they'll be probably another expert witness on the other side of the witness stand, sort of on the other side, challenging those evidence that you presented. So not saying that it needs to be more carefully examined compared to something that's related to research or a road authority, but normally you need to present it in a very convincing way, and you need to make sure that you gather those evidence, and those evidence are not contaminated in any way, so that they could be questions. So it goes back again to the aim of the investigations. Normally here you would also collect different types of evidence, and you would reconstruct the crash, because normally the exact speed in the event was very important to understand what the offending driver did. While in other crash investigations, maybe the speed plus minus 5 kilometers per hour is not so important, because you can draw conclusions, the conclusions that you're after, without doing that very advanced reconstruction. Which means that depending on the crash investigation or the nature of it, you'll spend different amount of time to actually do it. Now, we also have research-based investigations, and I've just pulled out the front cover of the report coming from the Enhanced Crash Investigation Study, ECIS, in Victoria, managed by the MUARC, Monash University Accident Research Center. And there's a lot of crash investigations actually happening on the basis of research. And why is that? Well, we know that regulation and based on scientific investigation and research promotes safety in the transport sector, to quote Professor Michael Fitzharris in MUARC. And there's many examples of that. And what research do is normally to collect evidence, to compile that evidence, and to make scientific observations on different things. Normally it would be, in this case, for example, contributing factors in life-threatening crashes. So you don't really looking into, as the other crash investigations were doing, looking into who's at fault, or what does the law say about certain things, or because you're more interested in, and this is where we go back maybe to the root cause analysis, you want to understand why certain things happen. You want to map those contributing factors out, and you want to understand the significance of those contributing factors in relation to each other. So you're not focusing on one court case, obviously. You're focusing on investigating a representative sample of a certain thing. So in Victoria, for example, it might be several hundred of severe injury crashes. Sometimes you might focus only on motorcycle crashes, or you want to focus on barrier impact crashes, or you want to focus on something else, depending on your research purpose, of course. So in this case, it was in the ECIS study. On the left-hand side in this table, we can see that, well, we source information from already existing sources in Victoria Police, TAC, VicRoads, etc. It could be media, it could be other things. But then on top of that, you'll have specially appointed crash investigators at MUARC that would look specifically at other types of crash information and crash causations, and they would do additional interviews, additional vehicle inspection, additional site visits, specifically for the purpose of the research question. So you'll have specific research questions that gives you or sort of guides you in the selection of the evidence that you're looking for, and you want to sort of have your investigation guided by that. So research investigations then are quite common, and we have a lot to thank, or a lot of our evidence and our knowledge in road safety and how things works are actually coming from in-depth crash investigations. Many of us would be familiar with the concept of travel speed and correlation to crash severity. So we know from our everyday that if we walk into a door, that hurts, but if we run into a door, that hurts even more. And if we fall from a building, the higher we fall, the more pain we will experience in the end of that. But to actually understand a bit more in detail, how exactly fast do we need to go to have a certain injury? That's when in-depth crash investigations have been used. Before we had all these modeled tools of crash data recorders, we actually needed to go on the scene, understand how fast people were going, understand how that correlates to the injury, and sort of make science out of that. So before I let Ken in here, let's just sort of see a few things that comes from accident research and research-based crash investigation. And really, it's that correlation between speed and injury. We can sort of more focus sometimes on system failures and extreme behaviors and their relative contributions. So how big proportion do we have where we really have those extreme behaviors? That's quite difficult to pull out from a registered database. We need to understand a bit more in detail how that interacts, or how that, when we find that. Just an example in terms of how roadside safety infrastructure, how it works, how it doesn't work. So really in terms of our road environment and research based on that, what type of guidance do we give to road authorities in terms of when things work and not work? Something that's quite important in terms of estimating the effect of maybe driver assistant technologies, electronic stability control, autonomous emergency braking, connected vehicles, all those technologies that you see coming out of vehicles today. It starts by someone seeing something in crashes to say, well, what if? And that's actually called counterfactual analysis. It's really looking at a fatality or a serious injury and saying, okay, this is a scenario that played out, but what if this vehicle had electronic stability control? And you have engineers that can simulate that event and say, well, it wouldn't actually happen. The crash would be prevented. And you do that on a systematic basis. And you then from that can pull out the importance of electronic stability control and understand the potential future benefit of it, and then sort of make a business case for it. Medical conditions in crashes, etc., etc. There's a lot of learnings from this, and we've just pulled out of the room. Yes.
Yeah.
Ken, did you want?
I'll jump in there. A good question's come in from Mark asking, have you seen a change to safe system focused forensic investigations sort of creeping into those forensic investigations? They're still very sort of liability focused, but the broader application of that term liability, so more than just, you know, looking for that liability to that individual driver or pedestrian or the like, but looking for road environment gaps, vehicle deficiencies, even at the manufacturer level, rather than the fact that somebody didn't maintain their vehicle. And I think that links in quite nicely with sort of what this course is trying to do to a degree. But maybe I'll get you to comment on that use of liability as opposed to sort of system improvement.
Yeah, I think if we're talking specifically forensic crash investigation done by the police, it's quite similar still. I mean, I've read through a lot of the reports from major collision unit, independent on jurisdiction, not only Victoria, and you can see definitely that there are things coming in there which are more system based, where they do take into account sort of what could be done with the vehicle, what can be done with the infrastructure, but it's more the obvious cases where maybe the police would look at a high-speed road, and now that they're more familiar with barrier treatment, they put that as a potential treatment that could have prevented this crash. But it's very ad hoc, it's not systematic, and it's very person-based. So it's not something that I would see happening on a systematic level. We'll get sort of further down in the presentation, we'll look at sort of vehicle industry and others, but slowly, yes, I think society as a whole is sort of going to that more system-based holistic approach to crashes, not only the driver error and the driver faults, but in some areas, I would say it's still very much focused on liability and what do we need to do to protect ourselves against liability.
Yeah, we'll continue to sort of build on that conversation. It did strike me, or remind me of the Waka Kotahi Vision Zero for Coroners document, which is trying to, I suppose, take another angle at that. And I might bring that document and put it into our resource folder just for people to look at. I think it's a nice, I suppose, approach to try to educate that sort of end recommendation maker from that legal liability perspective, or, you know, coroner's inquest, which aren't necessarily as much legal liability focused, but have that, you know, desire for improvement. But I'll let you keep moving on, Ewan.
Yeah, thank you. I will just finish our presentation sort of background in terms of what type of crash investigations we have. And we can see the vehicle industry, for example, they've been doing crash investigations for quite a long time, already since the 70s. If I pull out Volvo, of course, I'm Swedish, even though Volvo now is a Chinese car manufacturer, we still do some of the cars in Sweden. And really what they're promoting as the reason for them doing crash investigations is identifying areas of improvement for our products related to road traffic safety, of course, deliver knowledge, insight, and research results, and provide a link between research, advanced engineering, and product development. And I think this is on, of course, not only Volvo, but it's really part of the plan, do, check, act cycle that you can see in quality management in general, that, okay, we plan our vehicles, we do them, but then in real life, we need to check the real life performance of these vehicles. And in terms of safety, there's no better way to understand the real life performance of safety than to actually do crash investigations, to take the vehicles in, to look at them, to see how they work or they didn't work, and then sort of bring that intel back into engineering and product development. So it's been happening for several decades. I pulled out the GDAS German in-depth accident study that's been going since the 70s as well. If you're interested in this, have a look at GDAS. It's the most comprehensive in-depth database in the world, to my view. And they have thousands and thousands of in-depth crashes where you can learn from, and you have some in the US as well, but here you can really learn from that, and that's the sort of driven and funded by the vehicle industry for them to understand more about crashes and product development. If we then go into road authorities, Ken mentioned stuff in the beginning that I don't need to repeat again, but I think my experience, I've been working in Europe, in the US, Middle East, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and everywhere where you look at road authorities doing crash investigations is quite a similar pattern. It's about managing risks, and it's been about managing risk. And the types of risks that are managed are, one is further crashes at the same location, which is an obvious one. It looks really bad if you have a really severe injury or crash at a certain location, and the next day something happened on that same location again. And especially then if that keeps collecting, and you would call that a black spot, and you don't want that to happen. It doesn't look good. It doesn't look like we're taking responsibility, and you want to understand what's behind that. You want to avoid damage to road authority reputation. We're good at that. We're trained to do that in road authorities, and I did that for quite a lot of time. And really, what would sort of be damaging to our reputation as a road authority? Well, that would be a failure to pursue an investigation or required work with appropriate urgency. So we want to be seen as going out on the scene quite quickly and responding urgency to a fatal crash or high-profile crash. Insufficient investigation to determine an appropriate effective course of action. Insufficient record keeping, maybe, to meet auditing requirements, or to defend legal action. So you want to go out on the scene and collect that evidence. So if someone asks for it later, or if you get challenged, you have that in your back pocket so that you can serve the investigation with that. And then failure to pursue a determined course of action. So you want to make sure that you have your ducks lined up in terms of, we've looked at it, we have an understanding of the problem, we are going to do this with the problem, and we can defend ourselves based on that. And also, of course, we have the legal liability that we owe, maybe due to lack of action or failure then to pursue an investigation. So really the same as the above, but in this case, it's more legal liability instead of damage to our reputation. And I would say that this is not saying that there's a lot of people out there, including you guys probably, and me, that has had safety as our main motivation. I mean, when we go out there, we look from a safety perspective, and that's what's motivating us. But it's not historically been that safety is what's triggered an organization to do a crash investigation. It's more based on legal liability and the response to that. So this often, as I see it, seen all over the world, it sort of results in different type of things. It could be an action, such as a proposal for minor sign poisoning, postings, line markings, maintenance work, etc. It could be bigger things as infrastructure improvement programs, asset management, other types of programs, and of course, further discussions with other key internal stakeholders. So many good things are coming out of this, even though sometimes it's more with the purpose of legal liability. We can see that things are being done and things have been happening, and road authorities has taken a responsibility to respond to fatal crashes and to act on it and to actually make improvements. But I guess our course today is saying that, well, we can actually do better than this. With Safe System coming in and that approach, how would that change the way that we focus on things that might be more efficient and more focused on the problem that we're trying to solve? So last slide in this little session, before we go into Safe System crash investigation, is to just summarize different types of crash investigations that we can see and commonly familiar with. The police investigation purpose is to collect and present evidence at court. Very detailed forensic investigation and mainly focus on driver contribution. We have the research-based one, which describes the influence from contributing factors, evaluate intervention effectiveness, etc. And that is very detailed and targeted on the specific research questions. We have vehicle industry, product development, continuous improvement of the product, which of course focus on the vehicle performance, even though they try to take in other factors as well. And we have road authorities. Again, of course, we're looking for continuous improvements of our product, in this case, the road. But we also have an overarching safety responsibility, of course, for vehicles and drivers, etc., where we also want to see continuous improvements. But also it's about liability risk management, and it focuses on the road environment. So with that sort of ends the first little bit, and we're now going to focus a bit more on what's the difference really with the Safe System crash investigations. And I think we're running a bit short of time, so I think we'll just push on, but I'll let Ken sort of interrupt if we really need a bit of a break or some questions or anything. So Ken, please feel free to just continue with that if we need. But
yeah, no, let's keep moving along, because we've got 20 minutes left, and I'd like a little bit of time at the end just to show people the learning management system for those that haven't used it. Thanks, Johan.
Very good. So in terms of the Safe System approach, I don't need to go through this in detail, I think, but let's state the principles still, where the Safe System approach is a vision of zero death and serious injuries on our roads. Of course, we have the principle of movement shouldn't be produced at the expense of human trauma. So eventually, like in the long term, there shouldn't be a trade-off between a safe road and a good movement function. They should be planned together and not tradable. We do recognize that people will make mistakes. They always have been and they always will continue to do mistakes, even though, of course, those mistakes could be lower in numbers. They will never be zero. So we will have crashes, but the focus then is for the road system to be forgiving, and that crashes should not result in death or serious injury. Other type of crashes are not, we're not happy about them, but they're acceptable. But when it comes to death and serious injury crashes, that's where they are non-acceptable. And of course, in addition to the road users, system designers have a responsibility to reduce harm being done. So what we do in a safe system crash investigation then is really to look at this. If the system should be forgiving and crashes should not result in death or serious injury, what in the system has not been forgiven if we have a fatal crash or a serious injury crash? Why was not this crash survivable? So the main focus then is not necessarily to look at why did the crash happen, even though that's sort of unavoidable and we do want to have a story to try to understand what happened. The focus is not to map all those thousands of contributing factors. It's more to look at why specifically was this crash not survivable? Why have we not sort of lived up to the promise that we have in the safe system approach that the system should be forgiving and crashes, fatal crashes should be avoidable, given that we know that people do mistakes. And this goes back to sort of the Vision Zero and the shared responsibility and this is really the argument for this happening in the first place in the Nordic countries back in 97, 2000, when the Vision Zero was introduced and introduced in legislation. It was that system designers are responsibility for the design of the road transport system and thereby the level of safety within it. But road users are, of course, not without responsibility. It's up to them to follow the rules set by system designers, because we need to know, or we need to guide people on what would the speed limit on the road be, what are the protective gear that you need to use to protect yourself, etc., etc. But I think the main thing here is that if the users fail to comply with these rules, system designers are required to take necessary further steps to counteract people from being killed or serious injuries. So we know that road users has a responsibility, but if fatal crashes keep happening, we cannot just take a step back and simply blame the driver. We need to say that, well, the legal requirement from Vision Zero is that we actually need to take more action. As long as there are fatalities out there, we have not done enough, and we need to ask ourselves, what further do we need to do? So the question is really then, how do we know what further actions we need to take? And that's where crash investigations come into place. So in this case, it is a natural part of safe system and the Vision Zero approach, because it's really one of the tools that guides us in what gaps do we have in our system in this particular events, and how can we close that gap? And how do we get that information? Well, we need to understand first principles in terms of how people are injured, how people are fatally injured, what are the crash forces acting in that crash, and what can we do to prevent them? In doing that, of course, we focusing on the roads because we are road authorities, but really we want to look more holistically on it. So the sort of founder of Vision Zero, Claes Tingvall, was very keen in the beginning of this process to do crash investigations. And one of the things we sort of learned and continue to learn was the holistic approach that today is sort of something that we say all the time, but back in the days was quite new, where we know that road users, speed, vehicles, infrastructure, they need to act together to actually prevent a system failure. And a system failure in this crash, or in this instance, would be a fatal crash or a severe crash. So there are circumstances which, if they're combined with a certain road user behavior, a certain speed, a certain vehicle, a certain type of infrastructure, if it comes together, in a certain type of event, it would result in a fatal crash. And we all want to understand, of course, in every part of that chain, the road users' role, the speed, the role of the speed, vehicles and infrastructure. And in the crash investigation, we want to pull information from all those parts and try to understand where the failure has been. But ultimately, we will understand, or we understand, that road user will continue to be this leaking sheet of paper in a sense where we do those mistakes, and infrastructure and vehicle safety and speed in combination with that needs to be where it stops, to say that you can go here in the chain of event, but no further. We're not going to accept that it's going to go further into the fatal crash, and we want to understand why it did. So get ready for the poll, because I just want to sort of highlight some of the things that I've seen, and you might be seeing other things, where it's gaps often found in current crash investigation processes within road organizations or road authorities. Some of the things that I've seen and come across in crash investigation processes all over the world today. And one thing is that although safe system approach is common practice in many jurisdictions, and it's the guiding principles, it hasn't really filtered down to guide the crash investigation processes. We're still very much focused on legal liability, and we're not asking questions that are related to safe system type of principles and not standards and guidelines, even though that, of course, it's a part of it. Not sufficient focus on the fatal outcome and the crash focus. So we focus on the wrong things, which means that it's insufficient gathering of evidence and we don't get the information that we need. That in its turn sort of gives lack of guidance to decision makers. If we say that, well, this fatality happens because someone was drunk, if that's all the information that the decision making gets, it's difficult for them to understand what can we do as system designers to actually prevent that from happening again, even though we know that we have impaired drivers out there. There's normally a lack of coordination or systemization or capacity building to assist regions. So there might not be a national entity that actually build capacity in this space, or that sort of guides regions on what to look for, how to look for it, how to gather that evidence, how to discuss those evidences together to have a common approach on how to prevent it. Which means that it's insufficient learnings from crash investigations. Sometimes we just put another investigation on the shelf and we don't collectively look at them and see what we can do on a systematic level. So something could be an isolated event and the other event might be a systematic error that we need to fix, because it's going to happen all over the place again and again and again until we do something about it. But that's not really pulled out on the investigation. So there's insufficient learnings. No systematic handovers. So when we have these learnings, what do we do with them? Who's actually taking them into a quality management system or a learning system or something like that? And just a final one where there's no accreditation or certification and no ongoing capacity building. And that's more a research question, or sorry, a resource question and a capacity question where everyone needs guidance and continuous sort of improvements in the capacity in this space. So I think, Ken, are you able to operate the poll in terms of asking the participants on what have you come across in your either experience, if you've done these investigations or you've been involved in investigation, what's your experience in what's the three most common gaps that you've found in your organization? Or maybe you don't have an experience as an investigation. What's just your opinion on what might be the most common lack gap in your organization?
And you've limited it to only three, the top three, hey?
I have, yes.
Yeah. So people will have to select that. So pop your thoughts in there, and providing a really nice platform for us to launch into some of the more in-depth looks at some of the crashes and the like, which we have in future modules. So this one's very much a setting the scene module and getting us thinking in that system perspective. Okay, lots of thoughts coming in. This is good. I'll give it another minute or so there, Yuen, and we've probably got another 5 or 7 minutes for yourself, and then I'll very briefly just show people the learning management system.
That's very good. We have, I think, 2 more slides before we have the end of this session. And as Ken said, this is a more of an introductory type of session where we try to set the scene, and we're going to end this session looking a bit more, okay, what are best practice and just some examples and of best practice, or some mentioning of what's happening on other parts of the world. And that's hopefully going to set us up for the next session, which is more in-depth into the actual crash investigation and what we're planning to do. So, yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to end this poll in 3, 2, 1. And we really got a lot of good input there. I'm going to share those results because it's interesting to see a bit of a spread there, Yuen, and indicating there's a lot of work to be done across a lot of areas for us here there, but we see that the insufficient learning from crash investigations and the safe system integration into crash investigations coming out quite highly there, lack of ongoing capacity building and the like. So quite a range. Any particular insights for you there, or sort of what you expect to see, a range of things?
Well, I'm sort of happy to see, but not happy, that safe system approach integrated in crash investigations and insufficient learnings are top ones. I mean, that's really why we started this course and why we wanted to sort of bring that into it. And I guess it's biased because we are with fellow people that wants to aims to actually integrate safe system approach into the crash investigation processes. So in that sense, I'm happy. It shows that the participants sort of share our understanding of this and have the same passion. So yeah. Really.
Well, I'll be coming back to some of that thinking in the final module about how we can accelerate the integration of safe system thinking into crash investigation in people's organizations and what they can do to change that. But I'll let you finish off your last couple of slides there.
Very good, thank you. So why am I here on this course? Well, I guess part of it is that we've done in-depth crash investigations in the Nordic countries for almost 25 years now. And we have some learnings based on that. We have so many mistakes that we've done when we've done crash investigations, trying to sort of do it in a safe system approach, obviously zero approach. So hopefully we have some learnings from those mistakes that we can sort of pass on. But it's been, in terms of in-depth crash investigations and some of the principles and learning we're going to draw from is coming from a process that's been reality since around 2000, at least in Sweden, and we have similar protocols in Norway, Denmark, and Finland as well, and there's a network there sort of learning from each other. It's becoming more and more common in jurisdictions committed to Vision Zero or the safe system approach. So we can see in Australia and New Zealand, but also in other parts of the world where you go into an approach where every fatality is unacceptable and you want to understand more as a system designer what you need to do about it. Crash investigations becomes a more obvious tool to do that, and it's an increasing interest in that area. Now, what do we actually look at? What are the key questions in the safe system crash investigation? Let's boil it just down to 3 in this introductory presentation. It is pretty much what has happened, why was this outcome, why was the outcome of this a fatal crash, and what treatments are expected to prevent this fatality in the future. Those are the things that we definitely are focusing on. So it's difficult to learn from a crash or to pull that learnings into the hands of decisions making if you don't have a story, if you can't tell a story. So without what's happened, we are kind of blind. So we need to have a bit of a storyline. We need to understand a bit about contributing factors. We need to have a narrative, and that narrative is important. So what has happened, but also why was this crash fatal, and then treatments. And the middle one are the ones that we're going to focus on in the next session. How do we actually understand what result in a fatality? What are the crash forces? What are the injury mechanisms? How can you interpret evidence from a crash site to make those conclusions? That's what we're going to focus on. So really, what we're trying to do in these sessions is to focus on energy management due to the safe system approach, acknowledging humans make mistakes. The road transport system needs to be forgiving. And that's why we focus on that energy management principle without forgetting some of the other contributing factors, of course. So key outcomes and inclusions of a crash investigations, and this is the last slide. Some of the key outcome would be that we have a quick response on high severity, high profile crashes. We have evidence to engage stakeholders to make improvements. We have continuous improvements and quality control of the road safety interventions. If something that we think is safe show to be not safe, we need to understand why, and we need to understand it quickly. Monitor and adjust current strategies and processes. We have a strategy, or we have a standard, we have a guideline. It showed to be not safe. How do we monitor that, and how do we adjust it if it shows to be not safe? And then, of course, more in-depth information enables more detailed evaluation and predictive analysis. And we'll look at that in the end of the course, how we can use this in strategy management. So what does it include? This is pretty much what we're going to look at in this course. Information gathering from other sources. We need to do a site visit, possibly a vehicle inspection. We compile and analyze evidence. We talk to stakeholders, and there's action following that investigation. And that is pretty much an investigation. It's not much more complicated than that. It can be very complicated. It doesn't have to be very complicated as long as you ask the right questions. And I think that's the end of this session. I'll leave it over to Ken.
Thanks, Johan. And as we've been saying there, it's really setting the scene, and we'll delve into some actual case studies and crashes and looking at how we can make some of those decisions. But the learning management system, which you will have hopefully found, and hopefully you can see that on my screen now, and you can pop an introduction in there as we go. There is this resource folder, which we're going to be popping lots of different things into. You can see we've got some fact sheets already in there. We've got Vision Zero for coroners, the link to the Waka Kotahi New Zealand Transport Agency page there, which is an interesting resource. And you can see here module 1, and we've got the slides that Johan has presented, so you can relook at those, and you have a quiz that you have to complete. Now, we need you to complete that quiz before the end of the whole course, but we'd like you to do it early on, just to reinforce and do it while it's fresh. You simply attempt the quiz here, and it's a variety of things where you have multiple choice. You get to tick a few boxes. Next page, and you'll see there's some multiple choice questions. You've got those. You can have 3 attempts at that if you don't do so well. Everything that's in there has been covered in today's session, as we will always do. So hopefully you'll jump into that and have a go. And we look forward to a longer session for our next one, where we will have a short break in there, but we will really get stuck into some of that that content. So thank you very much. We did have a couple of sort of bigger picture questions, which we'll delve into throughout the course, which came into the chat directly to us. Really great questions, thinking about how we get funding to road authorities and we make decisions. Some big picture stuff, which we'll cover off a bit in the next modules, and certainly in the last modules. But that's ticked us over to the end of this session. Thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you a few minutes before the session on Thursday, and we'll do a little bit of trivia and give out some prizes. Thank you.
Thank you all.